Pack your personal belongings, Liam, and get the hell out of my building. Ryan Caldwell slammed the heavy folder onto the glass-topped boardroom table, his voice sharp and dripping with unearned authority. Beside him sat Bradley Cole, our newly appointed chief operating officer, who kept his arms crossed, his lips pulled into a tight, dry smirk. "We have already deactivated your directory access, and security is waiting in the lobby," Cole added, his voice flat and clinical. "Your entire portfolio of accounts is being reassigned to house management under effective immediately. If you attempt to contact any client, our legal team will tie you up in court until you are bankrupted." I looked at the security badge in my palm, then at the 32-year-old CEO who had inherited a multi-million-dollar empire but possessed none of his father's intelligence. I did not raise my voice. I did not make a scene or attempt to defend my 18 years of sweat and architecture. I simply placed the badge on the table, slid it across the glass, picked up my personal laptop bag, and walked out of the room. 6 months before that boardroom confrontation, my life revolved around transaction logs, replication pipelines, and database architecture. I was the Senior Enterprise Portfolio Director at Summit Tech Solutions in Portland, Oregon. I had joined the firm 18 years ago, when it was just a 6-person operation running out of a converted warehouse near the river. My college friend Arthur Caldwell was the founder. He was a brilliant, old-school engineer who believed in handshake agreements, impeccable service, and rewarding loyalty. Together, we built Summit Tech into a dominant force in hybrid cloud database migrations. My specific role was managing the company's enterprise accounts. While the sales team focused on mid-market clients, I personally oversaw the design, deployment, and ongoing synchronization of our 3 largest client portfolios. These were not typical clients, they were operational giants. First was Vanguard Health Systems, a massive regional hospital network operating 42 acute care facilities across the Pacific Northwest. We managed their real-time electronic health records replication pipeline, connecting legacy local servers to a secure AWS cloud database. This system processed millions of patient records and HL7 billing messages every single day. The portfolio generated $22 million in annual recurring revenue for Summit Tech. Second was Meridian Logistics Group, a national freight carrier and supply chain operator with a fleet of 5,000 trucks and multiple port warehouses. We maintained their live fleet telemetry and customs clearance database, ensuring that shipments cleared federal borders without delay. This account was worth $19 million annually. Third was Apex Financial Services, an investment management and insurance firm holding $12 billion in assets under management. We operated their transaction logging and compliance auditing pipeline, a system that had to be zero latency to prevent regulatory violations. Apex brought in $18 million in recurring revenue. Together, these 3 accounts represented $59 million of Summit Tech's $70 million in total annual revenue. That was 84.3% of the company's entire business, and all 3 of them were under my direct supervision. I didn't just manage the contracts, I had built their systems. I knew their chief information officers on a first-name basis. I attended their children's weddings, and I was the person they called at 2 in the morning if a replication pipeline stalled. My compensation package, which had been drafted and signed by Arthur Caldwell 15 years ago, reflected this responsibility. I received a modest base salary of $150,000, but my contract guaranteed me a 3% residual commission on all gross recurring revenue generated by Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex for as long as I actively managed their accounts. In recent years, as the portfolios grew, that commission amounted to $1.77 million annually. It was a massive payout, but Arthur always said that keeping 85% of our business safe in one man's hands was worth every penny. To make the integration between these massive clients and our cloud systems work, I had written a custom database replication engine named Synapse. Legacy enterprise mainframes do not speak the same language as modern cloud databases. Synapse acted as a real-time translator and transaction queue, ensuring that database updates were replicated with zero data loss, even during network outages. I had written the core engine of Synapse on my own personal time, using my own hardware, years before Arthur ever hired me. I held the registered United States patent for the synchronization architecture. When I joined Summit Tech, I executed a highly specific patent licensing agreement. The contract granted Summit Tech a personal, non-transferable, revocable license to embed the Synapse middleware into their cloud service offerings. The critical clause of that license, which Arthur and I drafted with our corporate lawyers, stated that the license remained valid only while Liam Vance was employed by Summit Tech and actively supervising the client accounts utilizing the technology. If my employment was terminated, or if my active portfolio management ceased, the license would automatically revoke within 5 business days. After that grace period, any continued use of the Synapse engine would constitute willful patent infringement. It was a safeguard we put in place to ensure that if Summit Tech was ever acquired by a larger competitor, my intellectual property and my role would be protected. We never imagined that the threat would come from within Arthur's own family. The shift in the company's culture began when Arthur Caldwell suffered a fatal heart attack. Within weeks of the funeral, his 32-year-old son, Ryan Caldwell, assumed the role of chief executive officer. Ryan had spent his life attending private schools and recently graduated with an executive MBA. He had never written a line of SQL code, never negotiated an enterprise service level agreement, and never spent a night in a server room monitoring a system migration. What Ryan did have was a driving desire to cash out. He wanted to dress up Summit Tech's balance sheet, maximize its EBITDA, and sell the firm to a private equity group named Oak Ridge Partners within 18 months. To help him execute this strategy, Ryan hired Bradley Cole as the chief operating officer. Cole was a notorious corporate cost-cutter who wore tailored gray suits and viewed human beings as simple rows on a spreadsheet. During their first quarterly financial review, Bradley Cole identified Liam Vance as a significant financial liability. In their eyes, my $1.77 million commission was not a reward for maintaining 84% of the company's revenue. It was an unnecessary expense that directly reduced their EBITDA. Cole calculated that if they could eliminate my commission, they would instantly add $1.77 million to the company's operating income. At a standard private equity valuation, multiple of 15 times EBITDA, that single cost reduction would increase Summit Tech's acquisition price by more than $26 million. Ryan and Bradley decided to reclaim my accounts as house property. They planned to transition Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex to a flat-fee management model, placing them under the supervision of Tyler, Ryan's 26-year-old nephew, who had recently joined the company as a junior account director. I was called into the executive boardroom on a Tuesday morning. The room was cold, smelling of expensive leather and polished mahogany. Ryan sat at the head of the table, turning a gold Mont Blanc pen between his fingers. Bradley Cole sat to his right, a thick document open in front of him. Liam, we are restructuring our enterprise accounts team to align with our new scalability goals, Ryan began, leaning back in his chair. The era of individual account ownership is over. Summit Tech is transitioning to a standardized corporate client management system. Bradley Cole slid the document across the table. It was titled Agreement for Portfolio Realignment and Compensation Amendment. I scanned the pages. The terms were predatory. It required me to voluntarily transfer all management responsibility for Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex to Tyler. It eliminated my 3% residual commission, replacing it with a flat senior advisor salary of $180,000, with a discretionary annual bonus capped at $20,000. I set the document and looked directly at Ryan. I cannot sign this, I said calmly. My contract with your father guarantees my active management of these portfolios and my 3% commission. I built these relationships, and I built the technology that keeps their databases running. Ryan's face darkened, the polite veneer slipping instantly. My father is gone, Liam. The market has changed. You are being paid nearly $2 million a year to sit in a basement office and watch servers run. That is completely unsustainable. We are offering you a very generous salary to stay on as an advisor. If you refuse, you are simply proving that you are not a team player. If I sign this, the clients lose their primary architect, and I lose the compensation I earned over 18 years, I replied. I will not agree to these terms. Bradley Cole leaned forward, his smiles disappearing. We anticipated your resistance, Liam. That is why we conducted a thorough audit of your workstation and network activity over the past month. We discovered that you have been checking out source code from our repository and running integration tests on your private external AWS server. That is a direct violation of our proprietary data protection policy. I laughed, a dry, quiet sound. Those tests were conducted on my middleware, Synapse. The source code belongs to me. I hold the patent. The license agreement allows me to run tests to ensure compatibility with your cloud platform. The patent is irrelevant. Ryan interrupted, his voice rising. The license agreement was signed by my father under terms that no longer reflect the competitive landscape. If you refuse to sign this amendment, we will terminate your employment for cause immediately. We will withhold your unpaid commissions from the past quarter, which total $450,000, as liquidated damages for your security violations. And we will file a formal lawsuit against you for misappropriation of corporate resources. They believe they had me trapped. They thought a 52-year-old database engineer would panic at the prospect of a protracted legal battle against a well-funded corporation. They expected me to beg for my job, or at least negotiate a compromise. I looked at Ryan, then at Bradley. I saw the greed in their eyes, the complete lack of understanding of how our technology worked, and the absolute certainty that their executive titles made them invincible. Understood, I said. I will not sign the amendment. Ryan slammed his folder on the table. Then you are terminated for cause, effective immediately. Pack your bags and get the hell out of my building. I stood up, picked up my laptop bag, and walked out of the boardroom. I didn't say another word. I drove home in silence, the afternoon traffic on the Marquam Bridge moving slowly under a gray Oregon sky. I was not angry, I was calculated. When you spend your life designing database systems, you learn to think in terms of logical gates and error recovery protocols. Ryan Caldwell and Bradley Cole had initiated a transaction without understanding the foreign key constraints. As soon as I reached my house in the Portland Hills, I sat down at my kitchen table and called Julian Mercer. Julian had been my personal attorney for 2 decades, and he had helped me draft the original Synapse patent licensing agreement with Arthur Caldwell. I explained the details of the boardroom meeting, the termination for cause, and the withholding of my $450,000 commission. Julian let out a low, appreciative whistle over the phone. They terminated you for cause, based on your usage of your own patented middleware? That is spectacular, Liam. They've essentially walked right into the gears of the contract. Let's review the patent license terms, I said. The license is clear, Julian replied, the sound of keyboard clicks audible in the background. Clause 4 states that Summit Tech's license to utilize the Synapse replication engine is directly contingent on your active employment and management of the accounts. Upon termination of your active management, the license enters a 5-day wind-down period. On the 6th business day, the license is revoked. If they continue to run any data replication pipelines using Synapse after next Wednesday at 8 a.m., they are committing willful patent infringement. The damages for willful infringement are treble, and we can seek an immediate federal injunction to shut down their servers. And the client contracts? I asked. I pulled the master service agreements for Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex, Julian said. All 3 contracts contain the keyman clause that you insisted on inserting. It specifies that you are the designated key executive. If you are removed from active supervision, the clients have the right to terminate their entire agreement with 10 days written notice, with no penalty, and they are entitled to a full refund of any prepaid unearned service fees. I nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Let's prepare the formal notice of patent license revocation, Julian. Send it to Summit Tech's general counsel via certified mail and email. Make sure it highlights that they have exactly 5 business days to completely migrate Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex off the Synapse platform. I will have it on their desks by tomorrow morning, Julian said. Next, I reached out to the clients. I called Sarah Jenkins, the Chief Information Officer at Vanguard Health Systems. I had worked with Sarah for 12 years, helping her migrate their electronic health records across 42 hospitals. Sarah, I wanted to let you know personally that I am no longer with Summit Tech, I said. My employment was terminated this morning. What? Sarah sounded genuinely shocked. Why? You are the only person who knows how our HL7 data mapping works. We are in the middle of migrating our southern facilities. The new management has decided to realign their accounts, I explained. They are assigning Vanguard to the CEO's nephew, Tyler. Tyler? The kid who sat in our status meeting last month and asked if AWS stood for Always Web Secure. You have got to be kidding me, Liam. Our systems cannot run without your oversight. We have an SLA that guarantees 99.99% uptime. If our synchronization pipeline goes down, our billing stops, and our emergency rooms lose access to patient histories. I am legally obligated to inform you that Summit Tech's license to use the Synapse middleware, which runs your replication pipeline, will expire in 5 business days, I added. My attorney has already sent the revocation notice. Sarah was silent for a moment. If Synapse is disabled, our databases go dark. We will have to revert to manual batch uploads. That will cripple our operations. Liam, our contract has a keyman clause. Yes, it does, I said. I will call our CEO and general counsel immediately, Sarah said, her voice turning cold and professional. We are not letting some 26-year-old nephew play around with our patient data. We will trigger the keyman clause. I made 2 more calls. Marcus Brody at Meridian Logistics was equally furious. His shipping dispatchers relied on Synapse to track 5,000 trucks across the country. If the telemetry pipeline failed, they would have trucks idling at the Canadian border. Helen Sterling at Apex Financial was terrified of the compliance implications. If their transaction logs failed to sync, the SEC would fine them millions. All 3 clients reached the same conclusion. They would not risk their operations under Summit Tech's new unqualified management. They instructed their legal departments to prepare the 10-day contract termination notices. By Friday afternoon, the pieces were in place. The transaction was committed. The rollback was no longer possible. The 5-day grace period passed quickly. In my basement office at home, I monitored the licensing server logs. The Synapse middleware was designed to check in with a central licensing endpoint, hosted on my personal AWS account once every hour. If the check-in failed, the engine would write a critical warning to the local system log. If the license was marked as revoked, the engine would gracefully terminate all active database replication threads after 96 hours of continuous warning state. This was to prevent accidental shutdowns during temporary network outages. At Summit Tech, Ryan Caldwell and Bradley Cole were completely oblivious to the digital clock ticking down. They had received Julian Mercer's certified letter on Thursday morning. The company's general counsel, a corporate lawyer named Douglas Vance, had brought it to Ryan's office. It's a bluff, Ryan had declared, throwing the letter into the recycling bin, according to my contacts inside the building. Vance is trying to scare us into paying his severance. Synapse is embedded in our platform. We own the platform, so we own the software. Tell our IT team to ignore it. The IT team was now run by Tyler. When Tyler looked at the local logs on the database servers and saw the warnings, license revocation imminent, 72 hours remaining, he assumed it was a simple configuration error. He tried to log into the database administration console to disable the warning, but he did not have the root keys. The master encryption keys were stored on my physical hardware token, which was sitting in my desk drawer at home. On Wednesday morning at exactly 8 o'clock, the 96-hour warning period expired. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee, watching the terminal window on my screen. The Synapse licensing endpoint received 3 simultaneous requests from the production servers of Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex. The server responded with the revocation flag. LUS. Revoked. Instantly, the replication engines executed their shutdown protocols. The synchronization threads closed their connections, committed the final pending transactions to ensure no data was corrupted, and halted. The results were immediate and catastrophic. At Vanguard Health Systems, the database sync between their 42 hospitals and the central billing repository went black. Within minutes, admission clerks could not verify insurance eligibility. Doctors in the emergency rooms could not pull up medical histories for patients transferred from other facilities. The billing department's automated system began throwing critical errors. At Meridian Logistics, the live tracking telemetry dashboard froze. The fleet dispatchers lost contact with 5,000 trucks. Shipments arriving at the Seattle and Tacoma ports could not match their cargo manifests with customs clearance records. Trucks began backing up at the border crossings, their engines idling as dispatchers scrambled to locate cargo manually. At Apex Financial, the transaction compliance log went offline. To avoid violating SEC rules regarding automated trading logs, their compliance officer was forced to order a halt on all high-frequency automated trading accounts, costing the firm hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost trade spreads every hour. By 9:15 a.m., Summit Tech's support desk was overwhelmed. Phones were ringing off the hooks, and the enterprise support ticket queue was filling up with critical Priority 1 alerts. Tyler and his database administrators tried to restart the replication engines manually. They rebooted the AWS instances, but the software refused to initialize, displaying a clean, unyielding error message. Critical, Synapse engine license revoked. Please contact Liam Vance. Tyler tried to bypass the license check by modifying the application's compiled binaries. But Synapse was built with cryptographic integrity verification. The moment Tyler modified the executable file, the engine detected a corruption of its signature and locked down the database, encrypting the local transaction queue to prevent data corruption. At 10:30 a.m., my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Ryan Caldwell's office line. I let it ring. It rang again 3 minutes later. This time it was Bradley Cole's cell phone. I picked up. Liam, Cole said, his voice tense and stripped of its former smugness. We have a system outage on the Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex databases. The replication is halted. We need you to log in and resolve the license key issue immediately. I am no longer an employee of Summit Tech, Bradley, I replied calmly. You deactivated my directory access last week, remember? This is sabotage, Liam. Ryan's voice yelled from the background, having apparently joined the call on speakerphone. You have disabled our proprietary software. We are losing millions of dollars, and our clients are threatening to sue. If you do not turn this system back on in 10 minutes, we will contact the FBI and have you arrested for computer fraud. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I didn't disable anything, Ryan. The software functioned exactly as it was programmed to do. Your company's license to utilize the patented Synapse engine expired 5 business days after you terminated my active management of those accounts. My attorney notified your general counsel of this last week. You chose to ignore the notice. Any continued attempt to run Synapse constitutes willful patent infringement. Liam, let's be reasonable here, Bradley Cole said, his voice adopting a desperate, conciliatory tone. We had a disagreement about the compensation structure, but we can resolve that. We are prepared to offer you your position back as Senior Enterprise Director. We will increase your base salary to $400,000, and we will offer you a 1% commission on the portfolios. I smiled. My original contract was for 3%, Bradley, and I have no intention of returning to a company run by people who do not know the difference between an API and an AWS instance. While we were talking, a quiet knock came at their office door. I could hear the muffled voice of Ryan's administrative assistant. Mr. Caldwell, we just received 3 certified letters from Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex. They are terminating their contracts under the Keyman Clause. Effective 10 days from today, the phone went dead silent. The transaction had run its course. The rollback failed. The fallout from that morning was swift, decisive, and entirely predictable to anyone who understood the fragility of corporate leverage. The loss of Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex meant the immediate departure of 84% of Summit Tech's revenue. The news of the contract terminations spread through the financial community within 48 hours. The private equity firm, Oak Ridge Partners, immediately withdrew their acquisition offer. They had no interest in buying an enterprise integration firm that had just lost its 3 anchor clients and was facing an intellectual property lawsuit. Furthermore, Summit Tech had a $25 million revolving line of credit with West Coast Commercial Bank. The loan agreement contained a standard covenant stating that the bank could demand immediate repayment of the entire balance if the company's annual recurring revenue fell below $50 million. With their revenue plummeting to $11 million, Summit Tech was in immediate breach of covenant. The bank sent a formal letter notifying the board that they were freezing the company's operating accounts and preparing to place the firm into receivership. Faced with the total destruction of the company, Summit Tech's board of directors called an emergency Sunday session. The board, composed of original investors who had worked with Arthur Caldwell for decades, realized the extent of the disaster. They acted with cold corporate efficiency. The board voted unanimously to terminate Ryan Caldwell and Bradley Cole for cause, citing gross negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Their termination meant the immediate cancellation of their stock options and the forfeiture of their severance packages. Ryan was escorted from the executive suite by the same private security guards he had hired to walk me out. On Monday morning, I received a call from Evelyn Caldwell. Evelyn was Arthur's older sister and the largest remaining shareholder on the board. She was an intelligent, practical woman who had retired to her vineyard in Hood River. "Liam," she said, her voice heavy with fatigue, "I am so sorry for what Ryan did. He has his mother's pride and none of his father's wisdom. The board has terminated him and Cole. We are in a desperate situation, and I am asking you to help us save what Arthur built." "I respect Arthur's memory, Evelyn," I replied, "but I will not work under a corporate structure that does not protect my intellectual property and my clients." "I understand," Evelyn said. "We are not asking you to come back. We want to negotiate a settlement and a transition. What are your terms?" Julian Mercer and I met Evelyn and the board's legal team on Tuesday morning. We presented our terms. They were non-negotiable. First, Summit Tech would pay me the $450,000 in unpaid commissions that had been withheld, plus interest. Second, Summit Tech would pay a settlement of $3.5 million for breach of contract and wrongful termination. Third, Summit Tech would execute a complete release of all non-compete and non-solicitation covenants, allowing me to service Vanguard, Meridian, and Apex through my own independent entity. Fourth, Summit Tech would transfer all custom database schemas, integration configurations, and mapping documentation for the 3 clients to my new entity, ensuring a clean transition. In exchange, I would grant Summit Tech a temporary 90-day license to run the Synapse middleware on their remaining minor accounts, after which they had to migrate off the technology. Evelyn looked at the document, then at the board members. They had no leverage. If they did not sign, the company would enter bankruptcy by Friday, and their shares would be worth zero. She signed. Within 2 weeks, I launched Vance Enterprise Solutions. My office was not in a basement. I leased a modern loft space with large windows overlooking the Willamette River. I hired 3 senior database engineers who had been laid off from Summit Tech during the post-crisis downsizing, offering them competitive salaries and equity in the new firm. Vanguard Health Systems, Meridian Logistics, and Apex Financial signed new 5-year enterprise agreements with Vance Enterprise Solutions. We offered them a slightly lower rate than they had been paying Summit Tech, which saved them money. But because I owned 100% of the firm, my personal earnings were far higher than my old 3% commission. We migrated their databases onto a new version of Synapse, running on secure, dedicated instances. The transition was flawless. The systems did not drop a single transaction. Summit Tech Solutions was forced to downsize its staff by 80%, consolidating its remaining operations into a small, managed service provider for local businesses. The board eventually merged the company with a regional IT reseller, cashing out at a valuation that was a fraction of the $70 million empire Arthur had left behind. Ryan Caldwell's career in technology was over before it began. The board filed a civil suit against him to recover the losses incurred during his tenure, and his name became a cautionary tale in Pacific Northwest business circles. Bradley Cole returned to Seattle, his reputation as a cost-cutter tarnished by the spectacular collapse of the Summit Tech sale. Sometimes, on quiet Friday afternoons, I stand by the window of my new office, watching the tugboats push barges down the river. I think back to the boardroom, to Ryan Caldwell turning his gold pen and telling me that my 18 years of service meant nothing. I think about Bradley Cole smirking, confident that a spreadsheet could replace 2 decades of architectural design and personal trust. They believed that power belonged to the person who could write the termination letter and command the security guards. They spent their lives playing corporate politics, believing that the loudest voice in the room is the one that controls the outcome. They forgot that in a world built on data, the most powerful person is the one who understands the code. I walk back to my desk, log into our AWS console, and check the transaction logs. The synchronization threads are running smoothly, replication latency is under 2 milliseconds, and the status lights are all green. I close my laptop, grab my jacket, and walk out into the clean Oregon air.